Worthy Grand Knight, Worthy Deputy Grand Knight. A couple of questions have come up here in the last 30 days or so, or the same questions come up a couple of times. And so I thought I would speak to it this evening. The Catholic Bible has 46 books in the Old Testament, while the Protestant Bible has 39. So there are 7 books that are part of our Bible that are not a part of the Protestant canon. Those are 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Sirach, Wisdom, Baruch, Tobit, and Judith. And I thought I'd take a little bit of time. It's a big subject, and I thought I'd try to do what I can with it in 10 or 12 minutes to speak to why we have this difference in the Old Testament canon. There were a lot of Jewish books written in antiquity. And the question, of course, is which ones are scripture, which ones were written under divine inspiration, and which ones are secular, which ones are purely human works. And to address that, we need to begin with a little bit of history. About 330 years before the birth of Jesus, Alexander the Great put together an army and marched across much of the ancient world. He conquered a big chunk of North Africa, including all of Egypt, most of the Middle East, all the way through Afghanistan, Pakistan, down into northern India. So where there had been dozens of kingdoms before the conquest, now there was one empire. Where there had been dozens of legal systems, now there was a single legal system. Where there had been dozens of different monetary systems, now there was a single currency. Greek became the common language throughout the area conquered by Alexander. After the conquest, it became much easier for people and goods to move around within the area that had come under Alexander's control. And then as now, people went where opportunities took them. So within a few generations, you had more Jews living outside of the Holy Land than you did living in the Holy Land. These Jews quickly became culturally very Greek. They spoke local languages where they grew up, where they were living, and they spoke Greek. We refer to them as Hellenized Jews. Most of them did not speak Aramaic anymore. Most of them could not read Hebrew anymore. So a need developed for a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. About 250 years before the birth of Jesus, Jewish scholars in Alexandria, Egypt, began working on a Greek translation. By tradition, that work involved 70 scholars and took 40 years. The translation that they produced is called the Septuagint, which means the translation of the 70. And it quickly became the most commonly used, most popular form or collection of Hebrew Scriptures among the Hellenized Jews. Judaism was centered around the temple. It was a cultic religion. It was, it was based on the sacrifices that were performed at the temple. In 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple. After the destruction of the temple, the Sanhedrin relocated to a town called Jamnia. And around 90 AD, the Pharisees set up a school in Jamnia to consider what to do next. I mean, what does it mean to be Jewish? How does the Jewish religion continue in a world where there's no temple and no priests and no sacrifices? Up to that point in time, the Jews did not have a single normative text. The Jewish scriptures circulated in different translations and recensions, and different Jewish groups disagreed with one another regarding what books constituted scripture. The Sadducees, for example, only accepted the Torah, the first 5 books. They read other books, they were familiar with them, but they regarded them as purely human works, not as scripture. The Pharisees broke the Jewish writings up into 3 groups: the law, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, which was basically everything else. They were agreed on the law, they were agreed on the prophets, but they disagreed amongst themselves about which of the writings were scripture and which were not. So Rabbi Hillel, for example, who's a very important rabbi who lived shortly before Jesus, held to a fairly narrow canon that may have been identical, certainly similar to the canon that a Protestant would recognize as the Old Testament. His contemporary, Rabbi Shammai, held to the Septuagint plus additional books like the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch. The Essenes, who left us the Dead Sea Scrolls, similarly held to a broad canon. They held to the books of the Septuagint. We find, for example, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragments of Tobit and fragments of Sirach. But we also find Enoch and Jubilees, so they seem to have held to quite a broad canon. One of the tasks that the Pharisees at Jamnia set for themselves was to establish a single agreed-upon Jewish canon. So there were debates. They took their time. But in 132 AD, Rabbi Akiba ben Joseph, who's a very important rabbi connected to the Jamnia school, issued a proclamation. He said, "The Gospels and heretical books do not defile the hands, and the books of Ben Sirach, that's Sirach, and other books written from then on do not defile the hands." So I need to explain defile the hands. They had a lot of ritual purity, ritual cleansing kinds of rules, and it's a little backward to my way of thinking, but if you handled Scripture, if you handled something that was written under divine inspiration, afterwards you had to engage in ritual hand washing. If you handled a purely secular, purely human text, you did not have to do that. So when he says that the Gospels and heretical books do not defile the hands, he's saying that those books were not written under divine inspiration. And the books from Ben Sira on were not written under divine inspiration. So Protestants tend to look at this and say, God entrusted the Scriptures to the Jews. After many years of thoughtful discussion, they settled their canon, and we should accept their conclusions, and they go with the 39 books that came out of that proclamation. And superficially, this sounds very reasonable, but there are problems with this approach. Notice that Akiba associates the books in question with the Christians. The Christians must have been using these books. Christianity had been around for almost 100 years at that point in time. And there must have been a significant number of Jews who accepted these books as authoritative as well, or there would have been no need for his prohibition. I found an article in the Jewish Encyclopedia, which is this master reference work put together at the beginning of the 20th century. It was about Akiba, and it talked about the decisions that he made in connection with the school in Jamnia and the establishment of the canon. And the article said, Rabbi Akiva rejected the books in question, so these are the 7 books that we usually refer to as the Deuterocanonical books, because they're canonical, which means second canon. Their canonical status was determined later than the remaining books. Protestants often refer to them as the Apocrypha. But it says, Rabbi Akiva rejected the books in question out of a desire to disarm Christians, especially Jewish Christians, who drew their proofs, in quotes, from the Apocrypha, right? So one of Akiva's motivations here is the Christians are using these books, and they are pointing to these books as in support of their argument that Jesus is the Christ. And so that's part of the reason that they are excluded from the final Jewish canon. There's a second reason. There were a number of major events, like the destruction of the temple, that were not prophesied. God didn't raise up a prophet to say, woe to you, O Israel, you need to do this or stop doing that, or the temple's going to be destroyed. The scholars at Jamnia understood this to mean that the age of revelation, the age of prophecy, the age of God speaking through men had ended. The last prophet was Zechariah. And so anything written after Zechariah must therefore be a purely human work. Well, Christians can't accept this argument, right? Because that wipes out the whole New Testament. There is no Christianity if you accept that the age of revelation closed with Zechariah. What sense does it make to accept Akiba's conclusions about which books are scripture if you can't accept or you don't accept his reasoning? So, on both counts, arguments in favor of a narrower canon fail. Protestants also adhere to the doctrine of sola scriptura, right? By scripture alone. Don't talk to me about your traditions. Don't talk to me about the teachings of your church. Show me where it is in the Bible. But the problem with that is that you can't look to the Bible to determine what books belong in the Bible. You have to look to an authority outside the Bible or to some body of tradition outside the Bible in order to construct the Bible in the first place. So this is a good example of why Catholics say we need both Scripture and tradition. We need both the Bible and the Church. The late R.C. Sproul was a prominent Protestant pastor. You may run across him. He wrestled with this question for a long, long time and finally declared the Bible to be a fallible collection of infallible books. If I understood what that meant, I'd explain it to you. In the end, what the Protestants have done is substitute the authority of Rabbi Akiba and the scholars of Jamnia for the authority of the Synod of Rome, Pope Damasus, the Council of Carthage, the Council of Hippo, the Council of Florence, etc. And this kind of seems strange to me because Protestants agree with us on the canon of the New Testament. If Pope Damasus was a competent authority to set the canon for the New Testament, why wasn't he a competent authority to set the canon for the Old? And then, lastly, so what's going on here? Well, I think we need to look at Luther. Luther rejected a number of Catholic beliefs and practices. For example, he rejected the practice of praying for the dead. Well, the book of 2 Maccabees says it's a good and holy thing to pray for the dead, right? So either Luther's wrong or 2 Maccabees isn't Scripture. It's got to be one or the other. And he found in the narrower canon agreed to at Jamnia a ready-made way to get rid of a whole bunch of books that were troublesome in terms of his theology. Protestants will also often object that the Deuterocanon or Apocrypha object to these books because they're not quoted in the New Testament. It's true, but it's spurious. There are a number of Old Testament books which Protestants accept that are not quoted anywhere in the New Testament. Joshua, Judges, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Song of Solomon, Obadiah, Zephaniah, Nahum. And yet they accept these without any quotations to support them in the New Testament. And there are allusions in the New Testament to Deuterocanonical texts. So for example, in Hebrews chapter 11, we read about the women received their dead by resurrection, some were tortured, refusing to accept release that they might rise again to a better life. Well, that's a reference to a story that doesn't occur anywhere in the Protestant Old Testament. It's found in 2 Maccabees, chapter 7, or in Matthew, chapter 22. The Sadducees come to Jesus. It's just the Sadducees did not accept they didn't believe in the resurrection. And they ask him, if a woman marries 7 brothers, and she, they all predecease her, and she has no children, whose wife will she be at the resurrection? Why 7, right? 2 would make the example work. Well, in the book of Tobit, we find the story of Sarah, the daughter of Raguel, who marries her way through 7 brothers and dies childless. The Sadducees are trying to set up a trap. They're trying to put Jesus in a position where he either has to renounce the resurrection, which is a core element of his teaching, or he's got to reject the authority of the book of Tobit. But that's only a trap if Jesus and his followers accept the authority of the book of Tobit, right? So a careful reading of the text finds that the Septuagint is the most commonly quoted version in the New Testament, and there are, in fact, allusions to events and stories that are found only in these disputed books. So, in summary, we use the Septuagint basically as it existed at the time of Christ. Yes, there were debates within the early church. Yes, not everybody agreed about what belonged in and what belonged out. But we had our councils. We took a long time to discuss this and debate it, and we came to the conclusion to stick with the collection of books used by the church from the beginning. We even know there's a group of Jews in Ethiopia called the Philasha, which is a whole subject that I'd love to do a separate talk about sometime. But they practice a very ancient form of Judaism, and the canon of their scripture, their Hebrew canon, is identical to our Old Testament. So, I think what I want to kind of conclude with here is that there are a lot of Protestant arguments, not just with respect to the Deuterocanon, but including with respect to the Deuterocanon, that sort of sound good when you hear them the first time. They sound convincing. They look good from 10,000 feet. But when you take the time to really sort of dig into this stuff, we have a very good argument to make in favor of the 46 books that we include in our Old Testament. And, it's not necessary for everybody to dig into this in detail and understand why, but I want to make that point. Right, so that's what I have to say this evening. Thank you very much.